Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're diving into a case that's captivated people for decades: the disappearance of Jodie Husentrude,
Yeah?
a morning news anchor from Mason City, Iowa. You guys have sent us a ton of material on this one: articles, podcast episodes, even a rap song.
Wow.
It seems like this case has really resonated with people.
Yeah, it really has. I mean, it's got all the makings of a true crime mystery,
Yeah,
young woman vanishes,
yeah,
whispers of a secret admirer, and still, years later, we're searching for answers.
right. So let's start by setting the scene a little bit for our listeners.
Yeah.
Jodie, she wasn't just a face on a screen. She was
No.
a real person, part of the community.
Absolutely. 27 years old, loved her job. She was a morning news anchor at KMMT TV,
Hmm.
active in her community, even took up golf lessons in her spare time.
That's interesting you mentioned golf. I noticed one article mentioned her new car.
Oh, yeah.
A sporty red Mazda Miata. Seems like she was someone who, embraced life's adventures.
And it's those little details, those everyday things
Mhm.
that make her disappearance so jarring. It's worth noting, too, that the sources you sent mentioned a few unsettling incidents leading up to her disappearance.
Really?
Yeah, she talked about taking a self-defense class. She felt like she was being followed.
Oh, wow. That definitely adds a whole other layer to this.
Right.
So it's June 27th, 1995. Jodie is supposed to be at the station bright and early, to anchor the morning news,
Right.
but she's nowhere to be found. What happens next?
Well, her producer, Amy Coons, starts trying to reach her, frantic.
Yeah.
It was actually pretty unusual for Jodie to miss work. There were a couple of times when she overslept. But even then, she always answered her phone.
This time was different, though.
Right. Amy gets a hold of her briefly, and she says she's on her way, but then the line goes dead. And that's the last anyone hears from her.
Wow.
When she still doesn't show up, they call the police. They head over to her apartment complex.
And that's where they realize something is very, very wrong.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
They find Jodie's red Miata in the parking lot. But the scene, it's anything but peaceful.
Yeah.
Her purse is lying open on the ground, contents scattered, a single red high heel nearby, and signs of a struggle, drag marks leading away from the car.
So, right from the start, investigators are dealing with a really chaotic crime scene and a lot of unanswered questions.
Yeah.
What were some of those initial challenges they faced?
Well, one of the biggest, there were no eyewitnesses. I mean, it was still pretty early. The parking lot was pretty much deserted.
Yeah.
No security cameras either to capture what happened. And the physical evidence, well, was limited.
Did they find anything useful at the scene?
They did find a palm print on the car, but even with, technology, it's never been matched to anyone. Some fibers, possibly hair inside the car, but it's unclear if they're even relevant. Seems like the struggle happened outside the car.
Right.
It's like trying to piece together a puzzle with half the pieces missing.
What about her apartment? Did they find anything there? Any clues to help explain what happened?
Well, they described it as typical for a busy single woman.
Yeah.
A bit cluttered, but nothing seemed out of place. One interesting thing, though, investigators noticed the toilet seat was up,
Ooh.
suggesting a man had been there,
Okay.
and there were used wine glasses, hinting at maybe a visitor the night before.
So the possibility of a visitor, raises a lot of questions. Was it someone she knew, someone she invited over, or could it have been someone with, more sinister intentions?
That's the big question, right?
Yeah.
Police did find Jodie's diary. Unfortunately, it didn't reveal any obvious suspects or motives. Most of the entries were just everyday stuff, her career goals, even a recent water skiing trip. Nothing that screamed, I'm in danger or someone stalking me.
But we do know from the sources that Jodie had, expressed concern about some unsettling incidents before she disappeared.
Right. Like the report she made about a truck following her while she was jogging.
Right.
And those strange phone calls she got, made her feel uneasy. So maybe she did sense something was wrong, even if it wasn't, written down in her diary.
So if Jodie was feeling uneasy, it makes sense that the police would start looking at, the people in her life, friends, coworkers, maybe even someone she had recently met.
Exactly. And that brings us to the first person who really caught their attention, John Venice.
Okay.
49 years old,
Yeah.
quite a bit older than Jodie, and he claimed to be the last person to see her alive.
John Denise's name comes up a lot in the material you sent,
Yeah.
and there's definitely a cloud of suspicion hanging over him.
Oh, there's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
For starters, that age difference, right,
Yeah.
immediately raises eyebrows.
Yeah.
And then there were some details about their relationship that just seemed off.
Like the fact that he named his boat after her?
Yeah, that was a weird one.
That's odd.
He also made some pretty awkward statements to the media, and some of Jodie's friends, well, they felt he was a little fixated on her. Even used the word obsessed.
And his account of the night before Jodie vanished isn't exactly clear-cut either.
It isn't. He claimed Jodie came over to his place to watch a video, of a surprise party he'd thrown for her earlier.
Okay.
But there's a problem with his timeline. Jodie made a phone call from her apartment after the time he says she was at his house.
So that discrepancy right there puts his whole story into question.
Right.
Plus, there was that detail about the toilet seat being up at Jodie's place.
Right.
He could have easily been there that night.
It's certainly possible. And the police definitely considered it. There were those used wine glasses too, remember?
Oh, yeah.
Further suggests she might have had a visitor. John, of course, denied being there that night. But the evidence, well, doesn't really support his alibi.
So right off the bat, investigators have a suspect with a shaky alibi and a questionable relationship with the victim. But despite all that, they couldn't definitively link him to Jodie's disappearance.
It's frustrating, but it happens a lot in these cases. Sometimes there's a lot of smoke, but no fire. And in this case, there were other potential suspects who emerged.
Like the rap song lead.
Exactly.
Now, that's a twist I wasn't expecting.
Right.
Let's dive into that next.
Yeah.
I'm dying to hear more about this rap song and how it connects to Jodie's disappearance.
Okay, so a reporter actually tipped off police about this guy, Tony Jackson,
Okay.
an inmate in Minnesota, already a suspect in a bunch of other disappearances.
Wow. Okay.
And the thing that connected him to Jodie's case, this rap song he wrote.
Oh, wow.
The lyrics mentioned a town called Tiffin. It's only a few hours away from Mason City, and the word stiffen, slang for a dead body.
So that's pretty creepy, especially considering, Tony's history. I mean, sexual assault and his victims kind of resemble Jodie.
You're picking up on the same things investigators noticed.
Yeah.
Unsettling parallels. But here's the thing. Tony claimed he was in the hospital the night before Jodie disappeared, even on crutches the next morning.
So he had an alibi,
Yeah.
but were the police able to verify that?
That's where it gets a little murky. We don't know for sure if they confirmed his alibi or just hit a dead end. The sources you sent mentioned a hair found at the crime scene, but it was never revealed if it matched Tony, or any other suspect for that matter.
That seems like a pretty big detail to just, gloss over.
Yeah,
Why not follow up on that?
it's a good question.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, one of the most perplexing things about this whole investigation.
Mm-hmm.
We just don't know whose hair it was, where it was found, or if it even played, any significant role in the case.
It's like that piece of evidence just vanished.
I know, right? Incredibly frustrating, especially when you think about how much weight DNA evidence can carry.
Right.
Yeah.
So Tony Jackson, despite the creepy lyrics and, his history of violence, he remains kind of a question mark in Jodie's case.
Yeah.
But he wasn't the only other person of interest, was he?
Not even close.
Yes.
Over the years, police investigated dozens of individuals, all with their own potential connection to Jodie. One name that came up in 2000, Dustin On. He was convicted of manufacturing meth and obstruction of justice, and a suspect in 5 other disappearances dating back to '93.
Wait. 5 other disappearances. That's a lot to unpack.
It is. But those cases were unrelated to Jodie's. The victims were all connected to Dustin's girlfriend,
Okay.
her ex-boyfriend, a former colleague, that colleague's girlfriend, and 2 children. They all vanished in '93.
Wow.
Their bodies weren't found until 2000.
So what's the connection between Dustin and Jodie?
The theory, and it was pretty flimsy, was that Jodie might have known something about those '93 disappearances, maybe working on a story about them, or even some speculated that she was involved in the drug trade herself. But none of that was ever actually substantiated.
It sounds like investigators were kind of, grasping at straws, trying to connect dots that weren't there.
It's understandable, though, given the lack of concrete leads in Jodie's case. They were exploring every avenue,
Right.
even if it seemed a little far-fetched.
I guess when you're dealing with a case this baffling, you have to keep an open mind, even if it means considering some pretty out there possibilities.
Right. And then there was another name that kept popping up, Thomas Korskeeten,
Okay.
convicted sex offender. Pretty disturbing history of violence.
This is the guy who made that really creepy comment about Jodie.
That's the one. Apparently he was talking to a court official.
Yeah.
The topic of Mason City came up. Thomas just smiles and says, Jodie Husentrude. Then he adds, I think she's dead.
Oh my God. That's like chills. How can you say something like that so casually?
I know. Especially with his history, right? He admitted to a lot of sexual assaults, including one at knife point. He even abused his own daughter.
Right, right.
Dangerous guy.
And he drove a van similar to the one seen at Jodie's apartment complex, right?
Yes. That was another link. Several reports of a white van around the time Jodie disappeared, and Thomas owned one that matched the description.
So why wasn't he like at the top of the suspect list? I mean, with that history and the van, he seems like he should have been prime suspect #1.
It does.
Yeah.
But his fingerprints didn't match that partial print they found on Jodie's car. And eventually, like so many others, he was ruled out as a suspect.
It's so frustrating to think that maybe the person responsible was right there in front of them the whole time.
That's the thing about cold cases, you know. So many missed opportunities. What ifs?
And as the years went by, the investigation just seemed to hit like dead end after dead end. Like every time they got close to something, it just, I don't know, something happened to derail them.
Yeah. And that brings us to another layer of this case, the media frenzy. The public, you know, just wanting answers. And that can be a blessing and a curse in a case like this.
Yeah.
Right.
I can see that. You have people who genuinely want to help, who might have information, but then there's also all the, the speculation, the misinformation.
Exactly. And with Jodie's case, the media attention was intense, especially after they featured her on Unsolved Mysteries. And then there's FindJodie.com, that website dedicated to, keeping your case in the public eye and generating new leads. It's a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
The attention can keep the case alive, but it can also lead to a lot of noise distractions.
Like that psychic that was, consulted on the case back in 2003.
Yeah. Remember that. A news director from Minnesota.
Right.
Gary Peterson. He got a letter from a psychic, offering their services.
Wow.
He was intrigued. Figured, hey, why not, right? See if she could provide any, insights into the case.
Did she? Did the psychic's reading lead to anything?
Not that we know of. The details were never made public. Yeah. But it doesn't seem like the psychic unearthed any, hidden clues or pointed investigators in the right direction. But it's interesting, isn't it? That whole psychic thing, it actually prompted Gary Peterson and a reporter named Josh Benson to produce a 13-part series on Jodie's abduction.
Wow.
And that, combined with, the efforts of FindJodie.com, really helped keep the case in the public consciousness.
But amidst all the attention, I feel like those involved, started to really feel the weight of time.
Yeah.
It's inevitable, I guess. Memories fade, people move on, and those who might hold these crucial pieces of information, they pass away.
It's true. And the case takes on a life of its own.
Yeah.
It's not just an investigation anymore. It's a story people latch onto, analyze, debate endlessly.
Right.
Yeah. And sometimes that desperate desire for answers can lead to some really bizarre twists and turns.
Like the woman who came forward in 2006.
Oh, yeah.
Claiming she had witnessed Jodie's torture and murder at a barn party.
That was a wild one. Very detailed account, names. It seemed credible at first.
Right.
But as investigators dug deeper, they found inconsistencies.
Right.
And she was eventually charged with providing false information.
So it's a reminder that, the public wants to help, which is great, but sometimes, those good intentions can backfire and actually hurt the investigation.
You're right. And that wasn't the only time, things got kind of blurry between public interest and exploitation.
Yeah.
In 2008, a local news outlet actually published pages from Jodie's diary.
Oh, wow.
Entries that had absolutely no investigative value.
Yeah.
Just sensationalizing the case.
That's awful. Who would do that?
Believe it or not, the source of the leak, the former police chief's wife.
What?
He had kept a copy of Jodie's diary, somehow ended up in his wife's possession, and she mailed it to the newspaper.
So the police had this diary all along, and they didn't see anything in it that was, worthy of further investigation.
Hard to believe, isn't it? And get this, the county attorney's office determined that the chief's wife didn't break any laws by leaking the diary.
Really?
So no charges.
That's crazy. Talk about an ethical lapse.
Yeah.
Leaking someone's private diary just to create more, drama. That's low.
It definitely casts a shadow over the whole investigation, especially since it involved someone so close to the police department.
Right. It makes you wonder if there were other times when things were, maybe mishandled or compromised.
Exactly. And those concerns were kind of amplified in 2009 when a Mason City police officer came forward.
Okay.
Her name was Maria. And she had some pretty explosive allegations.
This is where things get really dark, isn't it? The idea of police involvement, that's a scary thought.
It is. Maria claimed that her brother-in-law, a reverend, had gotten a tip.
Okay.
The 3 members of law enforcement, 2 Mason City officers, and 1 DCI agent were involved in Jodie's disappearance.
Wait, DCI agent? What does DCI stand for?
Division of Criminal Investigation. State-level agency.
Yeah.
Investigates major crimes.
Wow.
So their involvement would definitely raise the stakes.
Yeah. So we're talking about a potential, like, cover-up.
That was the implication.
Yeah.
And her story didn't end there. Maria claimed she had overheard conversations, at an apartment complex about the police's involvement. She even tried to track down these informants. But they both died under suspicious circumstances. One from an alleged drug overdose, but no drugs were found in their system, and the other from a stabbing.
It's like something out of a movie. Makes you think those informants, they knew too much.
Right.
Maybe they were silenced to protect someone?
It's a chilling thought, and investigators had to look into it. They launched an internal investigation into the 3 officers Maria named.
Right.
But they were all cleared.
That seems a little too convenient. 3 officers accused, and then suddenly they're all in the clear.
I know. Unfortunately, the details of the internal investigation were never released, so we're left with a lot of unanswered questions.
And what happened to Maria after she came forward with all this?
She was fired from the police department in 2011, accused of mishandling information and potentially compromising evidence.
So basically punished for speaking out.
Right, challenging the official narrative.
Wow. And despite all these twists and turns, all the suspects, the dead ends, the investigation circles back to John Venice in 2017.
Yeah.
What happened then?
Well, the police got a search warrant for GPS data from 2 cars connected to John.
Okay.
A 1999 Honda Civic and a 2013 GMC 1500.
Wait a minute. Neither of those cars existed when Jodie disappeared.
Right.
What could they possibly be looking for?
Good question. The contents of that warrant are still sealed. But it's led to a lot of speculation. Some think investigators believe John may have returned to Iowa at some point, maybe even visited a potential burial site.
But if that's the case, why hasn't a burial site been found?
Another good question. We just don't know. What we do know is the police have fought to keep that warrant sealed, so they must think it holds some really crucial information, something that could, crack the case wide open.
Like they're holding onto a secret weapon, a piece of the puzzle they're not ready to reveal.
Right. And then, just when you think you've heard it all, a private investigator named Steve Ridge drops this bombshell in 2020.
Okay, a private investigator and a bombshell. I'm intrigued.
So Steve Ridge had been looking into Jodie's case, independently for years.
Yeah.
And he claimed that someone who had been questioned by Mason City PD way back when, shortly after Jodie disappeared, had confessed to him. They destroyed evidence related to the case.
Wait, destroyed evidence? That's huge.
Right.
Were they acting on their own? Or were they following orders? What was this evidence they destroyed?
Unfortunately, those are all still mysteries. Ridge has said that he and the police are keeping it all hush-hush, to protect the investigation.
Oh, okay.
But it's been a few years now. Still no new information.
So we're left with more questions than answers. Was this confession the real deal? Or was it just another false lead? A red herring?
Hard to say. But one thing's for sure, this case is a tangled web.
Yeah.
Layers of secrets and unanswered questions.
As we, kind of delve deeper into this web, the question remains, are we any closer to figuring out what happened to Jodie?
That's the question that keeps us coming back, isn't it? Trying to make sense of the senseless. Finding justice.
Right. Let's keep going because we have, all these other things to look at, like those strange occurrences at Jodie's apartment complex weeks before her disappearance. All those little things, the beer cans, the creepy guy in the shadows, the mysterious cars coming and going. It's like someone was watching her, waiting for the right moment.
Yeah. You're right, those details can't be ignored. Each one, on its own, might seem trivial, but when you put them together, a pattern emerges.
Right.
Like a mosaic. Individual pieces don't make sense, but when you arrange them, you get a much more disturbing picture.
It's a scary thought. To think that Jodie might have been living with this, fear and uncertainty, maybe without even realizing it. Did she confide in anyone about these things?
There's nothing in the sources you sent to suggest that, but it's possible. She did mention those unsettling phone calls, remember? She described them as nasty and naughty.
Right, right.
But for some reason, those calls were never fully investigated, or at least the details were never made public.
It's just bizarre to me that such a crucial detail, a potential link to whoever's responsible.
Yeah.
It was just overlooked or dismissed. Why wouldn't they try to trace those calls? Surely technology back then was capable of that.
You would think. Right. But maybe the calls came from a payphone. Impossible to trace. Or maybe the records exist, but they're sealed. We just don't know. And that's what makes it so frustrating.
It's like we keep hitting a brick wall only to find out there might be a door hidden behind it, but we don't have the key.
Perfect analogy for this case.
Yeah.
Doors that lead nowhere. Clues that fade into dead ends. And always the question of the white van.
Ah, yes, the white van. It's like a phantom, appearing and disappearing, always just out of reach. It was seen in the parking lot that morning. But its significance, it's still a mystery. Was it just a random vehicle? Or was it the getaway car, that one missing piece?
Impossible to say for sure. But the timing, the lack of any other explanation, it's just too big to ignore.
It's like the ultimate symbol of the unknown. This blank canvas we project our fears and theories onto, our desire for answers.
And that's what makes it so compelling, this mystery. It invites us to become detectives, Pore over the evidence, connect the dots, search for the truth.
Even after all these years, all the dead ends, there's still this, a glimmer of hope.
Right.
That one day the truth will come out.
That hope fuels the continued efforts of investigators, findjodie.com, all the discussions, all the debates.
Yeah.
It keeps Jodie's memory alive.
Jodie's case is a reminder that every missing person, they deserve our attention.
Right.
Our empathy.
Right.
And our commitment to finding justice.
It's a call to action. Join the search.
Yeah.
Analyze the evidence. Don't give up hope.
Exactly, because maybe somewhere out there's that one crucial detail just waiting to be discovered. Maybe it's you, the listener, who holds the key to this whole thing. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and never underestimate the power of, even the smallest piece of information.
Because every detail matters.
Yeah.
Every voice can make a difference. And maybe, just maybe, one day we'll finally know what happened to Jodie Husentrude.
We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, and I gotta say, it's fascinating, but it's also incredibly frustrating.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
So many pieces of the puzzle, so many potential leads, but it feels like the bigger picture, it's still out of reach.
That's the thing about cold cases, right? More questions than answers. But sometimes going back to those unanswered questions, those little details that we might have overlooked, well, sometimes that can spark something new.
You're talking about those strange things happening at Jodie's apartment complex.
Exactly.
Before she vanished, right?
Right.
The beer cans, the guy lurking in the shadows, the mystery cars. It all adds to this feeling that someone was, watching her.
Yeah. It's creepy. Like waiting for the right moment. And while each incident on its own might seem small, when you take them all together, it's a pattern. Like, think of a mosaic. One little tile doesn't tell you much. But put them all together, and you get this whole picture, this disturbing image.
It's scary to think that Jodie might have been living in fear without even realizing it. Did she tell anyone about these weird things happening?
There's nothing in the sources you sent to suggest that she did. But it's possible. She did mention those creepy phone calls, remember? The nasty and naughty ones.
Yeah.
But for some reason, they never really looked into those, or at least they never made the details public.
That's just crazy to me. Such a big detail, a possible connection to, whoever took her. And it's just overlooked. Why not try to trace those calls? Technology back then, it wasn't perfect, but it could do that, right?
Yeah, you'd think so.
Right.
But maybe the calls came from a payphone, impossible to trace. Or maybe the records are out there, sealed away somewhere. We just don't know.
It's like we keep hitting a wall, thinking there has to be a door somewhere, but we don't have the key.
Yeah, perfect analogy for this case.
Doors that lead nowhere, clues that just fade out, and then there's always that white van.
Ah, yes, the white van, like a ghost. Appears, disappears. Always just out of reach. There that morning, but what does it mean? Just some random car in the wrong place at the wrong time? Or was it more than that?
Right, like the key piece we've been missing this whole time.
It's impossible to say for sure. But the timing, the lack of any other explanation, makes it a detail we can't ignore.
It's the biggest unknown in this whole thing.
Yeah.
We project all our fears and theories onto it.
That's what keeps us coming back to these cases, trying to figure it all out.
Yeah. Even after all this time, with all the dead ends, there's still that hope that someday the truth will surface.
And that hope is what keeps investigators going, fuels the folks at findjodie.com, and sparks those conversations and debates. It keeps Jodie's memory alive.
Jodie's case, it's a reminder that every missing person deserves our attention. We should all feel empathy for them and for their families, and we should never stop looking for answers. Never give up on justice.
It's a call to action, right? Join the search. Analyze the evidence. Don't give up hope.
Because maybe somewhere out there is that one little detail waiting to be found. And maybe, just maybe, it's you listening right now who has the key to this whole thing. So keep digging, keep asking questions. Never underestimate the power of even the smallest piece of information.
Every little detail matters. Every voice makes a difference. And maybe, one day, we'll finally know what happened to Jodie Husentrude.